Welcome to the Qasim Rashid Show, a civil rights lawyer here to expose all forms of injustice with a sprinkling of dad jokes in between. Here's your host, Qasim Rashid.
Good morning and peace be upon you this beautiful Sunday, wherever you're tuning in from. This is the Qasim Rashid Show here on Sirius XM Urban View, channel 126, the most awesome show in the multiverse. I am your host, Qasim Rashid, and as always, I want to thank you all for tuning in, your emails, your notes, your texts, your tweets. I appreciate them immensely. Grateful you all listen to the show and grateful you share it with family and friends. We've got a great show lined up today. Lorenzo Santos is here. Lorenzo Santos is running for U.S. Congress in the 1st District of Wisconsin. Phenomenal guy, running on a lot of the values that we care about, including calling for a ceasefire and release of all hostages in Gaza. And one of the reasons why I'm elevating him is because he's got a competitive primary, and he's the only one with the courage and the conviction to make this absolutely critical call for justice. So we'll have him on in just a little bit to talk about that a bit more. I also want to discuss what's happening in Florida with the new abortion ban going into effect at 6 weeks. We just finally managed to repeal this draconian ban in Arizona from like 1864 or whatever the hell that was. But now Florida is vying for the most ass backwards state in the country, and it has enacted a 6-week ban. So we'll talk about what that means as well. But the main thing I want to talk about today, in addition, before we bring on Lorenzo in a little bit, are these campus protests and HR 6090. HR 6090 is a bill that just passed the House overwhelmingly. I mean, not just Republicans, but Democrats voted for it 2-1, that expands the definition of anti-Semitism to include criminalizing the criticism of Israel. We'll talk about that in a second. But I want to talk about these campus protests that we're seeing, these anti-war protests that we're seeing in dozens of campuses. And I'm going to start with Columbia. And we start with history because what happens in history is a good indicator of what's going to happen right now. And you know, that old adage goes that those who don't learn from the lessons of history are what? They're destined to make the same mistakes again or commit the same errors again. And I'm also reminded of this social media post where a white woman said, I asked my daughter, who's white, about this, and my 9-year-old daughter said, it seems to me that the people who want to ban teaching about history is because they want to do it again. And that's what's really frightening. And so back on April 30th, 1968, Columbia University, the newspaper called the Columbia Daily Spectator, ran a front page headline that says, University calls in 1,000 police to end demonstration as nearly 700 are arrested and 100 injured. Violent solution follows failure of negotiations. And of course, those negotiations were to divest or to stop the Vietnam War, which Columbia refused to do. These students were protesting the Vietnam War, and after a week-long standoff, Columbia University ordered the New York Police Department to storm the protest and arrest the students. And that's exactly what they did. The results were devastating, more than 100 injuries. And that incident remains as a shameful stain on Columbia's legacy, something that they've oft lamented, that we should not have done that. It was wrong. We should have found a peaceful way. But yet, as fate would have it, on April 30th, 2024, 56 years to the day later, the scene at Columbia University was hundreds of NYPD police officers storming the encampment, going in through windows and arresting hundreds of students. It's almost as if 1968 never even happened. But on the same date, 56 years later, in 2024, Columbia University deployed law enforcement against students peacefully protesting the war in Gaza. A war, a siege, a genocide, which has to date killed more than 34,000 Palestinians, at least 70% of whom are women and children. But, you know, even more incredible is on Columbia's website right now. In fact, I don't know if it's still there. It was there at the time that I got the screenshot a couple of days ago, April 30th. On Columbia's website, the university have a whole post recalling and lamenting the 1968 violence against students. And it declared, without a hint of self-awareness, quote, Columbia is a far different place today than it was in the spring of 1968. Really? Really? Is that different? Because you just did the exact same thing. And the irony is that on this page, there's a red banner that says effective immediately access to the Morningside campus has been limited to students due to this protest. And so while they're talking about how different they are from 1968, they're deploying law enforcement on their students and have a warning on that page about deploying law enforcement. I mean, it seems despite the benefit of 56 years of hindsight, Columbia is not so different after all. And this is the reality that we are asking these universities to do something that upholds justice when they're exacting the exact same mistakes over and over and over again. And perhaps this time, these mistakes are even more dangerous because their leadership, Columbia's leadership, believes incorrectly that it has somehow reformed and moved past engaging in violent reactions to students. Students who, by the way, are peacefully protesting war and genocide. And this is what I mean, that now more than ever, it's critical that we stand in solidarity with students and professors, with Jews, with Muslims, with Israelis, with Palestinians, people of every faith and no faith who are committed to these causes of justice and peace and humanity. And our demands are really simple. They're very clear. It's not complicated. End this military siege of Gaza, end the military occupation of Palestine, end these illegal settlements of Palestine, and invest the necessary resources to build Palestine up as a sovereign and independent nation with the right to self-determination. That will ensure the safety and security of Israel. It'll ensure the safety and security of Palestinians. None of these demands are illogical or unwarranted or unjust. Each of them call to uphold basic human rights. And students recognize this, and they're putting their entire futures on the line to stand up for these human rights. And the fact remains that this is not new for students. Students protested segregation, and they were beat up mercilessly for it. Students protested Vietnam. They protested apartheid South Africa and demanded divestment, and it worked. It worked. This pressure worked. They protested the Iraq War, and now they're protesting the siege on Gaza. This is what students have always done. They've always been the conscience of our nation. This is what young people have long done. They've always been the conscience of our nation. This is not new. And if you think it's new, then you really have not been paying attention at all. You know, the fact of the matter remains that I'm seeing these people who say, well, yeah, I oppose this war and genocide, but I can't get behind these sit-ins on private property. That's just a bridge too far. What do you think segregation was? What do you think those young black students did, young black activists and white activists who joined them? What do you think they did? They were sitting in on private property to demand an end to segregation because it was unjust. Now, the fact remains that these protests have remained peaceful. The people engaging in violence are law enforcement being deployed by universities who are funded by billion-dollar corporations and billion-dollar individuals, and the pro-war protesters at UCLA, for example, hundreds of whom attacked the UCLA encampment, injured Palestinian, pro-Palestine, pro-justice, anti-war protesters. And for 3 hours, they attacked and beat the crap out of these peaceful protesters, and law enforcement did nothing. They just kind of stood by. Why is law enforcement able to deploy and engage so quickly to disperse anti-war protesters, but when it comes to these pro-war antagonists beating the crap out of them, they're gone for 3 hours? When it comes to white supremacists marching in West Virginia like they did just a couple of days ago, they're nowhere to be found. This is wild to me, and it's deliberate. And so I'm standing proudly and loudly with these anti-war protesters who are peacefully protesting, who are loudly, by the way, condemning anti-Semitism and calling out the provocateurs, the external provocateurs who are trying to cause ruckus. I mean, for crying out loud, at Northwestern, a pro-war extremist yelled out, "Kill the Jews." He yelled it out. This is somebody who is pro-war, yelled it out. And guess who got in trouble? The anti-war peaceful protesters who included Palestinians and Israelis and Jews and Muslims. They're the ones who got in trouble and got arrested for this disgusting statement by a pro-war provocateur. And this is no different than what happened at the Black Lives Matter protest in Minnesota. Law enforcement themselves confirmed that it was the white supremacists who infiltrated and started the violence and started the riot. So stay aware, stay woke to this, stay aware of what's happening, and recognize that we've got a lot of work ahead of us. And before we go to break, in this last minute, I'll point out that we are seeing examples of progress. Brown University, for example, negotiated with students to stop the protests, and in exchange, they will take a formal vote on divestment from military arms to Israel. Now, it won't be until October, which I'm not happy with. However, I do appreciate that it is a step in the right direction. Not a fast enough step. We got work to do, but we're seeing the ball move. We're seeing the pressure work. Without law enforcement, without violence, without any kind of people getting hurt or injured or, God forbid, killed, we're seeing progress happen. And other universities should follow suit. So when the Columbia president says she has no choice but to call law enforcement, no, you did. You chose violence. You chose to call law enforcement, knowing full well what happened last time in 1968. You did the exact same thing. You learned nothing from history. The Brown University leadership decided we don't want to involve law enforcement. We want to involve the students and treat them like the adults they are, and be the adults in the room and figure out a way to solve this. And adults talking to adults figured out a solution where not everyone is entirely happy necessarily, but we are moving the ball forward, and I commend them for that. All right, when we come back, we're going to talk to Lorenzo Santos about his run for U.S. Congress and these values that we're running on. You know, we often talk about talking the talk, he's walking the walk. I run for Congress. You know how difficult it is, and I'm proud of him for doing so as well. Lorenzo Santos, we'll talk to him right when we come back. You're listening to the Qasim Rashid Show here on Sirius XM Urban View, channel 126, the most awesome show in the multiverse. We'll be right back after this break. Welcome back. You're listening to the Qasim Rashid Show here on Sirius XM Urban View, channel 126, the most awesome show in the multiverse. I'm extraordinarily excited to welcome Lorenzo Santos to the show. Lorenzo is running for U.S. Congress. He's a 2013 graduate of the U.S. Naval Academy, got his bachelor's in political science, concentration in international, with a concentration in international relations. He served as active duty Navy as a surface warfare officer on the guided missile destroyer USS Oscar Austin, which is pretty impressive. Left the Navy in 2016, and he's been working in this in a number of different arenas we can talk about on the show. But he completed his master's at George Washington, and he currently serves as deputy emergency manager for Racine County and an intel officer for the Navy Reserve. He is chair of the Young Democrats of Wisconsin. He's on several impressive boards. He's a Rotary guy, which is amazing. He's also a fellow Truman National Security Project fellow, along with yours truly. Lorenzo, great to have you with us today.
Thank you for having me. Glad to be here.
I know it's always cringe when somebody reads your bio. I don't like my bio being read either. I'm like, let's just get to the point. But I like to read it for folks running for Congress, especially because I think, you know, people underestimate how much work it takes to really get into it. And you know, you've got the resume to prove it, and you're taking this big leap of running for U.S. Congress in the 1st District of Wisconsin. Let's start kind of high level. What in the hell made you think, you know what, my life's not busy enough, I need to also run for Congress?
Yeah, you know, just watching the past few years, what's been going on, and watching just not only at the state level with what's been happening in Wisconsin, but looking nationally, the GOP has been hard at work to erode, you know, fundamental rights, and they have shown no propensity towards stopping. They have shown no sign that they're going to slow down. A lot of these things are just their opening salvo. You know, there's talk about this Project 2025. It's really eye-opening to see just how far they're willing to go. And, you know, two things for me specifically were, you know, the repeal of Roe versus Wade, and also, you know, watching the Capitol stormed during January 6th, especially when I was studying Homeland Security at that time, it just
Yeah.
really opened my eyes, and it's something I never thought that I would see.
We're at a point in our democracy where a lot of people have kind of lost hope and they think that their votes don't matter, or that, unless you have tens of millions of dollars, you don't even have a chance of getting elected or getting your voice heard. And I try to push back on that in a number of ways. What are you hearing on the campaign trail? Where's people's enthusiasm? Are they deflated? Are they activated? What's your temp check so far?
Yeah, and that's a great point. I think that a lot of people, they're told every election is going to be the most important of their lifetime, and
Yeah.
there's this kind of numbness that comes with hearing that every time. And when we watch what's happening, it does maintain that truth because of the stakes. They do continue to stay just as high, every single election cycle. But this one specifically, it's not hyperbole. It's not, an exaggeration to talk about the fact that we are trying to preserve democracy here. The country will have two very different paths depending on who takes office, as the next president. And we have to really, this is a sobering moment because we already know what Donald Trump wants to do. And we already know that if he had a Republican majority Congress, that they do not have the backbone to stand up to him. And how do we know that? Because even as a candidate, even when he's not in office, they listen to him on issues of great importance, like getting comprehensive immigration reform through. So we know that there's a moment right now where we have two very different visions for the country, and people are looking for leadership. They're looking for people in Congress that will stand up to even their own party, even their own president, if it is the right thing to do. And the GOP has shown that they are woefully unable to do that. And we need people that are leaders. The Congress is meant to be a check against the executive, even
Right.
if it's your own party, if need be. And we have to have leaders who are not afraid to take those stances to make sure that we have principled and balanced government.
I agree with everything you said. And I would just add, Lorenzo, that I think we might be giving Republicans too much credit in saying they're afraid to stand up to Trump. I think this is just who they are. I don't
Mm,
think he is an aberration. Another journalist, Dino Vedla, says this often, that he's not an aberration of the GOP. He's a manifestation of who they
yeah,
are. And we have a country that was built on the genocide of one people and the enslavement of another, and have paid zero reparations in any capacity to either. And not only that, there's never been a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. There's never been any meaningful acknowledgement or apology made to those atrocities. And the whole system of legislation that we have built and the public policy that we have built is with that mindset as well. And someone like Trump comes along and says, hey, we're the real victims here. And he's been saying this, for 45, 50 years. And it's unfortunate that, to say the least, that he's been elected president. But let me dig into one point you made about where the purpose of Congress is to be a check on the president. Right now, President Biden is, in my view, getting a lot of criticism, rightly so, from folks on the left for his handling of the war on Gaza,
right.
and in some respects for the economy as well. We could talk about that. But what are some effective ways? What would you like to see more of Congress right now, especially let's take the student protests? What do you think President Biden could be doing better in this space to bring about justice, bring about more unity and more progress?
Yeah, what we're seeing are just atrocities, and we have to be able to call them exactly that. And the problem that we continue to see is, I understand that this is, a very difficult geopolitical question and subject, and there is nuance that has to be navigated, especially by the president of the United States. But as far as the Congress goes, we need to understand that we need people that are able to take a stand on this. And we have an entire generation right now that is telling us exactly where they want their leadership to be on this issue.
Mm,
If you see what's going on in Gaza, you shouldn't need, all these protests to tell you what we're seeing is wrong.
yeah.
But it is so evident. And during the primary process, when you see these uninstructed votes that are serving as, a warning sign to our president. This is, even if we agree with you on the majority of issues, this is one of the most consequential issues of our time
Yeah.
that we're seeing real time. And we have a chance to do right by history right now, not in retrospect, but right now. And he's being told what he should be doing. I don't agree with, the stances he's taken, and I'm
Yeah.
willing to say that. I
Yeah.
do think that President Biden has done a lot for the country, and there's a lot to be celebrated there. But this issue right now, we have to be willing to call out even one of our closest allies in the Middle East when what they're doing cannot be justified.
There's a great quote that you reminded me of by President Teddy Roosevelt, where he says, patriotism means to stand by the country. It does not mean to stand by the president or any other public official, save exactly to the degree in which he himself stands by the country. And, we're seeing poll after poll tell us that not just Democrats, but the majority of Americans, period, want an immediate ceasefire, an end to the arms trade, an end to this horrific siege as genocide in Gaza. And it's wild to me that the response has been, let's pass HR 6090, which expands the definition of anti-Semitism to include
Right.
criticism of Israel. And what's really painful for me as someone who's worked in this space for a long time is anti-Semitism is a real scourge in this country. It's a real scourge on humanity. And this
Right.
bill does nothing to actually stop that. It actually ignores that completely and tries to expand a definition that's going to end up chilling free speech. But before you came on, I mentioned to listeners that I'm very keen on who I support for Congress, and I'm proud to support you because you're principled on these values. Let's talk about another issue that's really critical and impacts at least 51% of the population directly and the rest indirectly. This war on women that the GOP is waging right now.
Right.
Florida just enacted an abortion ban at 6 weeks, making it a felony to provide or support an abortion. And it's a vaguely written law that makes it even worse for physicians that you can provide health care if failure to do so will result in substantial or irreparable harm, but doesn't define what that actually means. What is the temperature in Wisconsin? Because Wisconsin is a swing state. You guys
Yeah.
could literally determine the next presidency. What is the temperature on Wisconsin that you're seeing right now?
Wisconsin is in line with what we've been seeing across the country, and voters are speaking loud and clear on this issue. This is not something that should be left to, legislators or lawyers to decide. This is the right to choose, and these healthcare decisions are between a woman and their doctor and their families, and that's it. It is a
Yeah.
deeply personal decision, and we are, in fact, making it harder for doctors to give proper healthcare, even when they understand that not being able to give certain courses of action are going to be potentially life threatening. And this is a pro-life, they claim to be a pro-life party, but what they're really doing is they are tying the hands of healthcare providers to provide the best healthcare that they can provide
Yeah.
because they're afraid of these legal, these legal restraints that are being placed on them by, frankly, people that are not qualified to do this, old white men largely. And we need to make sure that we are producing legislation that preserves and protects the ability to make these very personal and in some cases they are life or death decisions.
What's confusing to me, and if you have I don't have an answer to this. What do you think? What are Republicans thinking? I mean, logically speaking, they're seeing red states like Montana and Kansas and Ohio and there's a couple other I'm forgetting that have voted overwhelmingly to protect abortion access. These are red states that went plus 20 Trump, but they're
Right.
voting plus 20 to protect abortion access. Knowing that, you would think Republicans would be like, okay, this is not the winning issue we thought it was. Maybe let's just back
Yeah.
off and focus on something else. Why do you think they're continuing to push through this? Are they dumb? Is it hatred of women? Like, what is it? What is motivating them to push on something that they know is a losing issue?
I do not at this point think that I I would tie Republican thought processes to logic. If that were the case, they would not have Trump being their nominee for the third time. This doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
Um, the fact that they have a man who is in trial more than he is on the campaign trail is a real issue for them, and they're doing this, supposedly clear-eyed. They're making this choice when they had other alternatives. I don't lend them too much, in the logic department. What I will say is a lot of it has to do with the fact that they are still taking their marching orders from Donald Trump.
Yeah.
He has his family running the RNC at this point. So they're unfortunately being run by folks that don't know what they're doing, that are not even a worthy opposition. I do believe that there is room for bipartisanship, and there is room for compromise.
Sure.
But
Yeah.
the GOP has shifted into something that just is unrecognizable to even themselves. They admit this all the time, and there just isn't really a worthy opposition here. There's not a lot of room. We are not in a place where I'm willing to bend on things like bodily autonomy. We're not going to be, have bipartisan agreements on that right now.
Yeah.
And the fact that they don't seem to even be able to, agree when essentially we hand them something on a silver platter, like, immigration.
Yeah.
That just shows that there's cynical politics at play. They do not care about people. It's all about power.
You mentioned something really significant I want to double down on about the GOP shift. And one of the examples I often give is when, and I'm sure you remember this too, because it wasn't too long ago, when they renewed the Voting Rights Act in 2006 under a Republican Congress and president.
Right.
It was a unanimous vote to confirm voting rights. And then 2 years later, the scariest thing in the world happened. A black man got elected president.
Yeah.
And you saw how Republicans then activated, and a couple years later we saw Shelby versus Holder stripping down the Civil Rights Act. And then you saw in 2018 or 2020, I can't remember the year, when an exact replica of the 2006 bill was reintroduced. You had Democrats vote unanimously for it and Republicans vote unanimously against it. And so you see that shift happening. And what's wild to me is, even though Democrats have stood firm on this issue of voting rights, which was a unanimous point back in 2006, Republicans have gone so far right, and it's so clear that they've gone far right. But still, you have media asking if Democrats are out of touch or why Democrats aren't willing to compromise. And
Right.
in that kind of a Congress, how do you find compromise? Where do you find allies in that space?
I think it's going to be very difficult. It's important to do. I don't think there should be this, move to just ram through every piece of legislation we can without the opposition party, because I think there is value, especially to the American people. The American people do largely want this vitriol and venom that they keep seeing in the discourse and rhetoric that their elected officials are speaking with. They do not want to see the Matt Gaetzes or the Lauren Boebert or the Marjorie Taylor Greens. Those folks are largely influencers. They're not serious legislators, and that's the job. That's why we're ultimately trying to go to Washington. That's why supposedly they were elected, is to get laws passed on behalf of the American people. So the American people are looking for leadership. They're looking for serious adults in the room, not children who are just trying to get sound bites.
Yeah.
They want substance. So that's what they want to see. And I do think there's room for bipartisanship. Hopefully we'll have a Democratic majority, though, where we will actually be able to get things done. Because again, I just point to that opportunity. We had a meaningful opportunity for bipartisan legislation when it came to immigration, and it was shot down. So unfortunately, right now, we just need to be realistic in that department, where the colleagues on the other side are not willing to necessarily do what needs to be done. So we will need a Democratic majority to govern. And I think the American people watching what we had with Republicans in power would agree with that assessment.
Let's talk about your race more particularly. And if you're just tuning in, we're speaking to Lorenzo Santos, who's running for U.S. Congress in the 1st District of Wisconsin. Correct me if I'm wrong, the only African-American, only person of color running in the seat as well. And
Yes.
there is one of the people I admire in politics is a woman named Amanda Littman. She's a co-founder and executive director of Run for Something. And they don't work on congressional races, they work on state races. But she wrote a phenomenal op-ed in Newsweek this week where she talks about how the problem Joe Biden has with young voters can actually be solved by having down ballot candidates run who are young and diverse as well. And she provides some really, really exciting data, right? She points out that she goes, simply put, having a Democratic candidate on the ballot increased turnout to the top of the ticket by anywhere from 0.4% to 2.3% compared to a district where the Republican candidate ran unopposed. And she adds that it's a small number with a big impact when you consider that in the last election, Biden won 3 states, and I think Wisconsin was one of them, by 0.6% or less. And it's a phenomenon they call reverse coattails. And, I think the fact that you're a young guy running for Congress says a lot. I think the fact that you're, you got a military background, you're African American, you bring a lot to the table. What has been your engagement with folks locally? What are some of the local issues in Wisconsin that people care about that you're able to connect with them better than anyone else?
Yeah, and speaking of that, it's been a interesting ride because we've been in this race, since August, and a lot of what I've been getting, as far as feedback goes, I have a primary opponent who has been in this field for a long time, and people are telling me, when I go knock on doors, they do respect this individual, but they do want to see someone new. They want to see the next generation, step up. And unfortunately, Washington, they have their algorithms and their formulas, and all they care about is name recognition and dollar signs, which money is important, but we've got to get people out and, that have traditionally not been engaged with, number one. Number two, we need a candidate that can excite them, not just through the primary, but also through the general election. So it's really important. And I've been the one candidate of color. The Democratic Party is saying they need more of those. I'm young, but largely I've been overlooked. So that's something I do want to make a point of. So when they say that, they don't show a lot of credibility in that department because they largely overlook us younger candidates for people that are older and have been in the game for a little bit longer, even if they're not the most exciting.
SantosForWisconsin.com is your website. And I completely agree. It is frustrating when we talk about how the Democratic Party is a Big Tent party, representation matters. I think at this point, our constituency is basically a minority-majority constituency. I think we have more non-white constituents than white constituents. And yet, as much as we criticize Republicans for being this, homogenous, monolithic, white male-dominated party, the Democratic Party in Congress is not much better. I mean, I think it's something like 80% are white, 70% are white men in Congress. So we have work to do. And I think it begins here. If you had to pick the 2 or 3 most significant local issues that people care about, what are you seeing at the doors?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, really, it's one of the biggest things is we are a manufacturing hub here in the district. And, CNH Case New Holland basically decided, as a lot of these corporations do, when they have to make these decisions, one of the first things they do is they cut their workforce. So they recently decided that instead of figuring it out and doing right by their workforce that has worked hard and stood by them, that they would make massive layoffs. And this is just another indicator that we need to ensure that we're standing by our workers. My opponent, my Republican opponent, Brian Stile, he decided to go against an act that would essentially allow workers and ensure that workers had the ability to advocate for themselves.
Hmm.
So, it's important that we are standing by our workers, that we're making sure that we are advocating for them, because they are the backbone of the economy. The Protect the Right to Organize Act. I mean, this is Brian Style. He represents a manufacturing district and
Wow.
decided to vote against the ability to organize. But if we look at his marching orders, because money is marching orders, and we look at who's funding him, he's getting money from CNH, but it's not the side of the workers. So he's
Hmm.
taking his order from the executives to say whatever they need him to say. So we need to make sure that, number one, we are ensuring that our workers have that support, that we are legislating that workers have the ability to organize and advocate for themselves and collectively bargain. Because we know that if we leave it to the executives, they're not going to do that. They're not going to make those
No,
decisions
of
that are
course
best
not.
for them.
Of course
And they're
not.
going to take those fat bonuses at the end of the year, which
Golden
is the
period.
biggest
Yeah.
insult to injury. So we need to make sure we're doing that. We need to make sure that we are continuing to invest in green solutions, green innovations for the future, because we also know that not investing in that, the people that are going to be the most hurt at the end of the day are people that make less in this country.
Yeah.
We have a lot to gain by investing in more clean energy solutions. We have more to gain by investing in, by the way, Brian Stahl voted against the Chips and Science Act, which would ensure that we control our supply chains, repatriate jobs that he sent overseas, so that these companies could, make more money by not paying people what they're worth here. So we need to be doing that. We need to make sure that the supply chains are American owned and
Yeah.
American controlled. So those are a few things that we need to be doing. We also need to make sure that no one is touching Social Security and Medicare. People earn that. These are, the GOP loves to use the word entitlements, and they use it as a form of contempt. And the American people earned each and every bit of that because they paid into it first. And all this talk about, oh, we'll look at raising the retirement age and we'll look at cutting benefits. There are real people behind those benefits. There are real people in the
Yeah.
first district of Wisconsin
Who paid
behind
into
those
them?
benefits.
Yeah. Yeah. Who paid into
Exactly.
them? Yeah.
And they always pretend that they have no intention of doing that. And then when they get called out, they want to pretend that they don't know what we're talking about. So we have to really pay close attention, and we have to keep fighting for that, and not just preserve it where it is, but we need to make sure that we are actually expanding on it. And back to jobs again, we need to make sure that we increase the federal minimum wage. One of the biggest reasons that people are struggling out here is because it's just too expensive to live in this country. The cost of
Yep.
living is astronomical. Just to have what I believe is a human right, just to have shelter, just a place to live, to lay your head. It's expensive. And we are not paying people nearly enough to be able to do that. So we've got to raise the minimum wage in this country. And I challenge my opponents, both of them, to also stand with that. Because if you are saying that you stand with the people in this district and you want them to have a better future, and you want them to be able to survive, because you can't survive on what we're paying people right now. A minimum wage is just the beginning of that conversation.
And a lot of it is, it's a vicious bribery cycle. You got corporations who will fund the reelection of politicians, and then the
Right.
politicians will look the other way on the poverty wage paid by corporations, and the corporations will continue to fund those politicians. So it's legalized bribery. And it goes beyond the economic justice. It's also a basic human dignity and human life aspect. There's a study done that showed that every dollar increase in living wage resulted in a % decrease in suicide rates.
Right.
And I mean, it's causing some mental trauma to people that we can't even conceive, because it's literally exacerbating suicide rates. This is literally a life and death issue. And I know you also fight for guaranteed universal health care, and you're fighting for meaningful climate justice by getting fossil fuel money out of politics. So
Absolutely.
I share all this because we're down to the last 3 minutes. And I wanted to make sure folks know that when we talk about, electing the right people, Lorenzo is an example of that, because his policies reflect not the interests of corporations or of for-profit companies, but the interests of working people, the interests of what basic science and common sense tells us to do. In the last minute, Lorenzo, talk about two things. Talk about just kind of your family. I want people to know a bit more about you personally, and then also how can they get involved with your race and how can they support you going forward?
Yeah, we really need to continue to build our community outreach. So, if you would be able to volunteer with us, go to santosforwisconsin.com. You can sign up to volunteer that way. We're going to be knocking doors, make sure we're talking to our neighbors. We're going to be making phone calls, and we're going to be holding events throughout the communities so that people can meet me and ask me their questions so that I can make sure that they understand what it is our campaign stands for and that we're hearing exactly what they want me to be fighting for them in DC.
Brilliant. Lorenzo, thank you for joining today and hope to have you back on before the election. Oh yeah, when is election day, by the way?
So the primary is going to be August 13th. So we look forward to getting there.
Fantastic. August 13th. All right, Santos for Wisconsin. Lorenzo Santos, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you very much, Qasim. Thank you for having me.
That is Lorenzo Santos, candidate for Congress in the 1st District of Wisconsin. Check his website out at santosforwisconsin.com and throw a little bit of coin his way as well. We need to elect good people, and that doesn't happen for free. Whether it's $1 or $1,000, every bit makes a huge difference. You're listening to the Qasim Rashid Show here on Sirius XM Urban View Channel 126, the most awesome show in the multiverse. We'll be right back after this break. Welcome back. You're listening to the Qasim Rashid Show here on Sirius XM Urban View Channel 126, the most awesome show in the multiverse. That was Lorenzo Santos. If you want to support him, go to his website and check out our social media. We're tweeting out his content. But he's got an uphill battle for sure, but he's got the tools to win this thing, and I'm hopeful that he does. And look, at the end of the day, the way we spend our money is a reflection of the future we want. So I do encourage you, go and contribute to his campaign if you can. Even $1 makes a big difference. And if you want to volunteer, volunteer. And if you're in Wisconsin and in the district, vote for this guy, because this is the kind of person that we need in Congress. And at the end of the day, we're not going to get the meaningful change we want unless we're investing in the people-funded candidates that we need to invest in to ensure we bring about that progress. All right. We started our show talking about government overreach on these university campuses. I'm going to end talking about two things: one, abortion; two, HR 6090. HR 6090 is an incredible bill, incredibly dangerous bill. Let me be clear, because what it has done is it has decided that we need to expand the definition of anti-Semitism to include, here's the crazy part, to include criticism of the state of Israel. This is unprecedented. It would be an unprecedented restriction on free speech should this bill becomes law. So let's address this. First of all, numerous Jewish groups, as well as the ACLU, staunchly oppose HR 6090 for obvious reasons. First, it is truly unprecedented because it will have a chilling effect on free speech, especially on college campuses, where, as we just discussed, students and professors from across the faith spectrum are peacefully protesting Israel's war on Gaza. Hadar Suskin, the president and CEO of the Jewish-led group Americans for Peace Now, had this to say about HR 6090. He says, quote, "Anti-Semitism is the hatred of Jews. Unfortunately, one doesn't need to look too far to find it these days. But the supporters of this bill, HR 6090, are looking in the wrong places. They are interested in supporting right-wing views and narratives on Israel and shutting down legitimate questions and criticisms by crying anti-Semite at everyone, including to Jews who oppose Israel's far-right government. With this disingenuous effort, House Republicans have failed to seriously address anti-Semitism. I hope the Senate does better." Likewise, the ACLU sent a letter to Congress writing a scathing letter that The American Civil Liberties Union sent a letter to Congress to oppose H.R. 1690, the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act. As the letter notes, federal law already prohibits anti-Semitic discrimination and harassment by federally funded entities. H.R. 1690 is therefore not needed to protect against anti-Semitic discrimination. Instead, it would likely chill free speech of students on college campuses by incorrectly equating criticism of the Israeli government with anti-Semitism, end quote. And look, never before has the United States ever passed a bill that makes criticism of a foreign state government illegal. And the reason is obvious. Individual people have rights. Governments do not have rights. This is not a complicated thing to figure out. People have rights. Governments do not. If you're a person, if you have a pulse, if you have a beating heart, you have rights. A government is none of those things. It doesn't have rights. It's amazing to me how even Republicans will attribute, life to a government that doesn't exist, but not to actual people who are being discriminated against. And several leading members of Congress, like Representative Jerry Nadler, a Jewish American, who also is a member of, I think, the largest and most diverse Jewish constituency in Congress, he condemned H.R. 1690, and he said, speech that is critical of Israel alone does not constitute unlawful discrimination. By encompassing purely political speech about Israel into Title VI's ambit, the bill sweeps too broadly. And that's the key thing. This is modifying Title VI on education on university campuses to criminalize criticism of Israel. Look, here's the bottom line. Jewish people, as human beings, deserve protection of equal rights and deserve safety in who they are because they're human beings. But to criminalize the criticism of a state entity is extraordinarily dangerous precedent. By the same logic, a future Congress could criminalize criticism of Pakistan as being anti-Muslim because it says the Islamic Republic of Pakistan, or of Iran as anti-Muslim because it says the Islamic Republic of Iran. Obviously, neither withstands scrutiny past First Amendment free speech rights. Similarly, criminalizing the criticism of the state of Israel is at its foundation a flawed bill because the state of Israel is a government, not a person. And finally, and perhaps worst of all, H.R. 1690 doesn't actually do anything to combat the scourge of anti-Semitism. And that's deeply unfortunate because anti-Semitism is a serious issue. It deserves meaningful legislation to counter it. And this bill does none of that, but gives the veneer. In reality, it just stifles free speech. And as of right now, H.R. 1690 has not yet passed in the Senate. It hasn't yet been signed into law by President Biden. But it's critical that we remain active and organized and ask our senators and the president to vote no on H.R. 1690 because if it passes, it will be a devastating bill. Now, speaking of devastating bills, this is what's going on in Florida. SB 148 has become law in Florida. It bans abortion after 6 weeks of pregnancy. It took effect last week, Wednesday, just after midnight. Now, before that, the state had actually been a refuge for people seeking abortion access. But the vast majority of its neighboring states, because the vast majority of neighboring states have strict restrictions. So more than 9,000 people traveled there for abortion care last year. Now, that number doubled from 2020. There are about 80 to 85,000 abortions performed in Florida annually. And this bill is going to significantly curtail that trend. It is now a felony in the state to perform or actively participate in an abortion after 6 weeks gestation, which is also only about 2 weeks after a missed period. So most women don't actually even know they're pregnant at the time. The ban does have exceptions for rape and incest and human trafficking up to 15 weeks, which is still absurd that it's only 15 weeks. It does allow abortions to save a woman's life or to prevent substantial or irreversible physical impairment. But again, that's such a vague determination. Who decides what's substantial? Who decides what's irreversible? And who decides if a doctor says that's a decision that the doctor was right in making that decision? And that's the whole point. It's to cause confusion, it's to cause fear, it's to cause misinformation. And again, I go back to what I've said often before. There are 0 studies done that demonstrate that abortion bans work. None. Every single study out there proves, without a shadow of a doubt, that abortion bans do not decrease abortion rates. They increase maternal mortality of women by at least 23-24%. They are killing women with these draconian pieces of legislation because they're trying to have a one-size-fits-all approach to a really complex healthcare issue. And it's absolutely asinine that the so-called pro-life party is engaging in a policy where it's actually pro-death. It's asinine and it's devastating and it's dangerous. This is why it's critical that we stay active, that we stay engaged in the space. And if you look at the map of where abortion is banned or unavailable, everything south of Missouri, Indiana, Kentucky, Arkansas, Oklahoma, Texas, all of it is gone. You've got a couple of places in, of course, Virginia and Illinois and New Mexico, but the entire southeast of the country, it's banned or restricted. And there's no wonder that those states have higher rates of maternal mortality and infant mortality. This is life and death, folks. It's critical that we stay engaged. And it's critical that we don't sit idle. This is why I have people like Lorenzo Santos on to discuss these issues and make sure that we are electing people who are actually going to protect our basic healthcare access. All right, my friends, thank you all for tuning in. Be sure to follow us on social media at Qasim Rashid across all platforms. We will continue to advance a show that builds on compassion and justice and accountability for those in power. Got a great show lined up next week, an outstanding show next week. Be sure to tune in, same time, same place at 10 a.m. on Sunday on Sirius XM Urban View Channel 126. Or if you're listening on Substack, it'll be uploaded the following Monday on Substack as well. Be sure to upgrade your subscription from free to paid if you can. My friends, be fierce, lead with compassion and justice, and continue speaking truth to power. Until next week, peace.